reform and increasing restriction, 1965 to 1976. The 1965 Immigration Act was a watershed moment for the nation. This was the beginning of what many called the new wave of migration, primarily from Asia and Latin America, including Central and South America and the Caribbean. The 1965 Act finally ended those unfair quotas that had been established against Southern and Eastern European countries in 1924. So we can think of it as having liberalized immigration law for that region as well as for Asia. However, for the Western Hemisphere, the 65 law established a quota of 120,000 entrants per year for the very first time on a first-come, first-served basis. In other words, it was not country-specific. The 65 law also did a number of other things. First, it established preference categories for family reunification. What this meant was that people in the United States could petition for spouses, children, parents, or other family members in a home country or sending country to enter the United States legally. The 65 law also continued the exemption for parents of U.S.-born children. In other words, parents of U.S.-born children did not have to be subject to these numerical quotas. They could bypass them. And the Act established preference for skilled worker recruitment. The skilled worker recruitment program, or H-1B visas, are what attracted tens of thousands of scientists, doctors, engineers, and other skilled workers to the United States. For example, between 1966 and 1977, 83% of Indians or South Asians who migrated to the U.S. entered under the category of professional and technical workers. As Vijay Prashad shows us, approximately 20,000 scientists with PhDs, 40,000 engineers, and 25,000 doctors. So this was a provision that brought us people in professions that we felt at the time we had a shortage of. For the case of Mexico and Latin America, however, the 65 Act was incredibly important because for the very first time, Mexican immigration and migration from the rest of the hemisphere was subject to numerical restrictions or limits. What this meant then was that it severely restricted and disadvantaged Mexico in particular, our neighbor to the south, which we already knew was the largest sending nation in the hemisphere in these years, especially because of the Bracero program. Now, some years later in 1976, Congress passed another law, the Western Hemisphere or Eilberg Act. This law maintained the family and skilled worker preferences that had been established in 1965. But it very importantly ended that exemption of labor certifications for parents of U.S.-born children, or children who were U.S. citizens. As one observer noted at this time, quote, 25% to 35% of all Western Hemisphere immigration results from the exemption from labor certification for parents of minor United States citizen children, unquote. So that means essentially parents of children who were born in the United States, many who were often born in the border region with Mexico or Canada. The 76 law also established a 20,000 person annual visa quota per country for the Western Hemisphere. So regardless of what country in the Western Hemisphere, each nation had a 20,000 annual quota of visas that would be granted. As Austin Fragaman noted again in his observation of the law in 1976, quote, the only country in the Western Hemisphere which substantially exceeds 20,000 persons per year at the present time is Mexico. When the new law becomes effective, the 20,000 allotment for Mexico will be reached with very few numbers available for old registrants. Moreover, the other changes in the law will greatly curtail the number of qualified immigrants from Mexico, unquote. He continued explaining that, quote, the new law has obvious deficiencies, which many believe are so acute as to negate its positive aspects, particularly the severe curtailment of immigration from Mexico and the elimination of the exemption from labor certification for parents of minor United States citizen children. Without a doubt, this 1976 immigration law restricted immigration from Mexico even further, making it nearly impossible to get a visa legally. So ironically, while we had conditioned the labor force of our neighboring country to migrate north for work, we were criminalizing that migration by making it harder and harder for people to get legal papers to enter the United States. So let's look at this quote from Mark Day. He says, "Let's do away with the term illegal aliens. In fact, let's do away with the illegal status that plagues millions of workers without documents who live and work in the United States. In recent months, unemployment and inflation have once again focused attention on undocumented workers and their families. They have become the scapegoats of the present downturn and are treated as if they personally brought it about. The problem of illegal immigration will never be solved with deportation raids and repressive legislative proposals. The truth is that when the United States is prospering, we welcome these humble workers from Mexico. When we hit a slump, we use deportation raids and legal repression to dispose of them." And that comes from Mark Day, former assistant pastor at St. Joseph's Catholic Church in East Los Angeles. We might think that this is something that someone would say in today's moment, but this actually was expressed in an editorial in the LA Times in 1975. Throughout the 1970s, in fact, illegal immigration drew a great deal of media attention and was constantly in the public eye. As we will see in the next unit, the reforms meant to curtail that immigration did not have the results that some intended.